Welcome to Today with Dr. J, where I give you the guidance and tools to figure out what works for you in your recovery. My name is Dr. D. Jaffe, and I'm here to help you live happier, more purposefully, and without limits. I tend to ruffle some feathers for doing this, but I do away with the notion of once an addict, always an addict, because I believe that anyone can beat their addiction with the right mindset, tools, support, and education. Nothing can stand in your way to success. You don't have to commit to anything but action. You don't have to have anything but motivation. Whether you want to quit, drink less, or simply become more mindful around mental health and addiction, I'm here for you.
What I want to talk about today is something that came up for me around a couple session that Sophie and I did. So we still do some couple sessions here and there for people. And what came up is something that one way or another ends up happening in a lot of the relationships that we talk about here, but it was such a present and obvious example. I like to bring it up. Somebody will connect to the story. We've been working with this couple for a few months. And the way that we do the work is we sign people up for like a small package of sessions on the front end, 3 to 5, something like that. The idea we tell them right off the bat is, look, we're going to do the first 1 or 2 sessions and you'll feel like things are hitting your stride and you'll kind of take your eye off the ball. And then inevitably you'll need another one. A lot of couples, a lot of relationships in general, we get to this place where, you know, we feel like we're drowning and then we stabilize the boat and new water's not coming in. So we go, okay, we're good. And then we forget. We just kind of forget to keep doing the work because it's not that bad. Literally the thing that goes on in our head, well, it's not that bad anymore. So that's what happened with this couple. We did a couple of sessions and then things got much better. Even at the beginning of the session yesterday, the woman in the relationship, the wife said, oh my God, right before this thing happened a couple of weeks ago, we were so happy. I was starting to trust him again and all this stuff. And then the breaking point happened in which, so 2 weeks ago, the guy texted me for the first time in maybe 3 months. That gives me 2 things that I want to talk about. And the first one is the specific instance or the category of the instance that happened here, which I think is a variant of what happens to a lot of people a lot of the time. And the second piece is that one about not continuing to do the work as things get better. Unfortunately, I believe that's one of the most obvious and surefire ways to get to a place where you're taking water in your boat again. I mean, I'll just take that example farther, that metaphor. If you're only paying attention when the water's at your knees because you know you're going, oh my God, we're going to drown, that means you missed all these other opportunities along the way to catch tiny little leaks that allowed a little bit of water, or things that just weren't operating at 100% or even close to it, suggesting they might break down and create a leak on ships, on airplanes, on, you know, any large vessel, especially one that transports a lot of people or cargo. They have a massive checklist to go through before they ever do anything. I mean, you can imagine this for a plane. They're not going to wait for the engine to sputter midair to go, hey, we should look at the engine and see if everything is fine, right? On a ship, nobody's going to go on a voyage and then wait until water starts leaking in to go, did anybody check the engine room? It's too late at that point. So what they do is before they start anything, they do a checklist. And if you think about it, because these vessels are out all the time, you know, this happens for taxis, by the way, it happens for anything where there's a repetition of doing the same thing over and over and over. It always starts out with a checklist, a way to examine where you are. The reason you do it, even though 90% of the time you do it, you find nothing wrong, is for the other 10% of the time. That's why you do it all the rest of the time. So this couple, like many of the people that we work with, just when things got good enough, they were so happy with good enough, right? They were on the verge of divorce. So good enough sounded great. The problem is you can't tell the difference between good enough and on the verge of divorce until you're on the verge of divorce. And you don't want to end up there. So you have to have ways to check in. Now you can adjust how frequently you check in based on the level of need, but I would urge everybody here to not take your eye off the ball. Guys, the reason I still lead whatever it is now, 3 or 4 groups at Ignited, they're my check-in. And it's a way for me to make sure that I talk, hear, and pay attention to other people's stories, tools that I know that I have that I forget how to implement, right? I need that check-in myself. So I build it in. Now I'll go into what exactly happened with this couple, because it'll be a good example of why this was such an obvious thing that could have been resolved. What had happened for this couple was the guy was having a side relationship with another woman, never ended up being physical, but for months and months and months while his relationship was going on, flirting, sexting, stuff like that. And the woman was remote. So there was actually almost like no chance that they would ever, or no real quick present chance that they would ever connect. Who knows about the future? But he was essentially having another relationship while married. That's obviously a problem. right? That's not something we want. Now, you all know in the context of Ignited, once we resolve the trust issues, which will probably take us a year or two, I want to understand why. What's missing in the relationship that this felt like a good idea? And then that could not only be in the relationship, that could be things about this guy and communication patterns, his relative lack of ability to create conflict and express his needs, all this stuff, right? So that'll end up happening at some point. But right now, we're really trying to get back and establish trust in a meaningful way. I don't think you can have a good relationship without real strong trust. It makes for every conversation, every interaction to have friction that you don't need otherwise. Because literally in the middle of the conversation, even Anna, one of the friends of this girl, had told her, "Do you even believe him?" And the wife said, I don't know. I don't know if I know that he's telling me 100% the truth. So that, that was literally explicitly what came out of her mouth. This guy, whatever conflict was happening in the relationship, whatever he wasn't getting, whatever felt anxiety provoking to him, got this thought a few weeks ago that he wanted to, once the wife found out that there was relationship going, she asked him to completely cut it off. Like, done. You're never talking to this person again. It's an obvious ask and an obvious yes, that makes sense, right? And for whatever reason, a month or so ago, he started thinking that he would just like to get some resolution. But he never told her why they stopped talking. Now, the thought alone makes sense by itself. You don't want to not be nice to people and cut them off and never tell them why. You don't want to be mean and and ghost people for no reason. If he wasn't married and this wasn't a breach in trust and all the other things hadn't happened, that thought would have made sense, which is why it can land. It can get like a beachhead. For everybody listening here, this is not all that different than, I just won't tell him this. That's not that important. He doesn't need to know this piece. Or I'll just have one glass of wine. Nobody needs to know. Or I'm gonna buy this thing even though that's gonna cut into my rent payment, but I don't need to tell anybody, right? It's that first thought that kind of makes sense because nobody really needs to know, because it's $50 or one glass of wine or just a single phone call. It sounds like it makes sense in our heads, and then it burrows. It just sits there. He didn't share this with his wife, and he had the thought, so now he's got shame and guilt on top of it. Like, oh man, I shouldn't be thinking about calling this girl. And over a period of a couple of weeks, the thoughts kept escalating and escalating and escalating. And every time there was a fight, every time there was a disagreement, every time something bad happened in the relationship or in his life in general, he would go to this thought because it was kind of like this little quiet relief option, right? Like, oh man, if I can only finally talk to that girl and resolve why things ended between us, I would know for sure that everything is fine, that I'm not an asshole, essentially. He said it lasted about 2 weeks. My guess is it probably lasted a little bit longer than that. And that's when he became aware of it, as 2 weeks before. Long story short, eventually on a weekend, he works outside of the house. He made the call. Apparently, according to him, it wasn't a good call. This woman was very distant, like, you're an asshole, you cut me off, that all the stuff. So it wasn't a good call, which in his mind, like, resolved things. Still hasn't told his wife anything. He'll have the thought, he's like, I shouldn't do it. Yeah, I shouldn't do it. I'm not going to do it. And then eventually something happened. And again, the something could have been contextual. He had an opportunity, or it could have been a fight with his wife that was big enough, or a weird, awkward moment, whatever it is. And he needed the relief. And in the past, this girl served as a relief, like a drink, like watching porn, like fill in your blank. And so he just went for it. And now he really screwed up. Long story short, his wife sees the phone call, of course, on his records. They have, like Sophie and I have, they have an open phone policy, and her world falls apart because she doesn't know what they talked about on the phone. She doesn't know it was the first time he'd done it, or if it's the first time he'd done it in a long time. She doesn't know if she can trust anything else he's told her now. So now, after, however many months where things were the best they'd been in a really, really long time, the final piece is the wife is like, oh shit, they weren't even the best they'd been in a long time for the whole time of the months. And I don't know when that started. So now she can't even trust her good feelings. Like, before, she was just unable to trust her husband. Now she can't even trust her own feelings and her own intuition. And now there's close back to ground zero as you can get. The difference being, by all accounts, from what she can see, it wasn't a continuous pattern of interaction. It was a single call. But all that same trust, all that same inability to understand your own thoughts, let alone the intentions of the person you're with, come into the game. That's when we meet. That's when he starts texting me, and when we meet. The hardest thing when this, I'll call it calamity, happens in a relationship, especially when it's happened numerous times, is finding the motivation and finding the goodwill and finding the intent for both partners to jump back on the horse and do it again, because it's not the first time, which in my mind is very akin to any of us who have struggled with alcohol or drugs, find ourselves for, you know, I don't know how many times giving things another try.
Thanks for watching, and I hope you found the lessons helpful in your recovery. Click below to like, comment, and subscribe. Plus, if you want to find out more about the work that we do at Ignited, visit IGNTD.com for more.